We'd like to introduce on the show now Eilish Burke, who's a professor in the study of aging and intellectual disability. You're very welcome to the show again.
Thank you very much, John. I'm delighted to be here and delighted to be chat with you.
You might start just by telling us where the study came from in the first place.
Okay, so we're IDS-TILDA, so it's the Intellectual Disability Supplement to the Irish Longitudinal Study on Aging. So it's a big mouthful, but IDS-TILDA started in 2007, and it was started by Professor Mary McCarran. Now, if you go back a year prior to that, the longitudinal study on aging started, and I'm sure a lot of people know about TILDA, and that's been run by Professor Roseanne Kenny. But when we looked at all the longitudinal studies on aging across the whole world, none of them included people with intellectual disability specifically. And Professor McCarran saw the opportunity to start one specifically looking at people with intellectual disability because they've got very unique health issues, and there's a lot of health disparity and challenges in that area. Plus, at the time, the landscape for the care of people with intellectual disability was quite different. A lot of people lived in institutions or residential type settings, and that has all changed now. So we've been in existence since 2007. We're investigating the health and well-being of older adults with intellectual disability. When I say older adults, I say people over the age of 40. And that's a little different than the general population studies because they look at people over the age of 50. So it's not to say people are 40 or 50 or older. It's just for people with intellectual disability, they tend to present with older age conditions at a much younger age. So we can get a better trajectory and a better view of their progression across the lifespan, let's say.
And
so
have you looked at people with intellectual disabilities from an early age all the way through?
No, that's something that we're starting to think about and look at now, because really, it's like us all, we have to take a lifespan approach to our health. So if you were active and as a young child and you built the habits of being active, you're more likely to be active and have good habits later in life. Whereas if you weren't as a young child or young adolescent, you're less likely to be as you get older. It's all to do with having good behavior lifestyle. It's good habits. And so yes, we are looking at to include people who are younger. So it's another study. It's a different study, but because our own expertise is in that older age group.
So what's the age range that you looked at?
So we started at the age of 40 and we didn't push any upper age. We do have somebody, I think, in their 90s. So across
very good.
Yes, yes. Of course, that's something as well that kind of prompted the whole study. People with intellectual disability didn't live into old age. That's quite a new phenomenon. And when I say new, I mean in the last few decades. Right. Like if you look at the 1970s and earlier, people with intellectual disability didn't live into their 50s or 60s. Whereas now we're seeing people living into their 60s and beyond, which is wonderful. And that's really attributed to good healthcare, good, better lifestyle, and good overall good care.
And better supports.
Better supports, better education. Like across all of Ireland, we're like all adults, we're living longer. And that really is attributed to completely change in our lifestyle. If you go back to many years ago, like if someone lived to their 50s and 60s, it was a great age. But now we're all expecting at least 80, if not beyond.
So is physical activity, sport and so on, does that play an important part in people living longer, people in all categories?
In everybody. And I think I've listened to Professor Roseanne Kenny talking about what we call the social determinants of life and our behavioral lifestyle. If you're active, if you've good lifestyle behavior, like you eat well, good sleep, take care of your mental health, have good social networks, getting out and about, getting engaged in your community, people who volunteer have a much better outlook on life, but they also, they have longitude, they have more longevity, and they experience more longevity. So it's that engagement is as important as physically taking care of yourself.
When you say you started at 40, for the age range of starting at 40, did you find that the people you were talking to were living independently, or were they in other settings, and were they in relationships?
That's an interesting question. So when we started out in 2007, the majority of people were living either in supported group homes or residential.
Okay.
In 2010, 2011, there was a big policy change, and it was decongregation. So they were closing down the large institutions and supporting people to move into the community. So now when we look at people, there's a complete change. The majority of people are living in supported homes, community group homes, or living at home and independently. What we're seeing is a big difference between the 40-year-olds back in 2007 and the 40-year-olds today. Today, the 40 to 50-year-olds there's higher levels of education. They're more engaged in internet access, more engaged in technology and multimedia. Whereas back in 2007, there was very little of that. We saw very little of that. Of course, COVID had a big impact on increasing the access to internet and all, I think for everybody, but it was very much, we observed it clearly in supported community group homes for people with intellectual disability. So yes, there are differences, and we are seeing differences. And I think the 40-year-olds today are more vocal. They've got a stronger voice and to have stronger advocacy.
They're taking charge of their own lives.
They're taking charge of their own lives, which is
a fantastic thing.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
And what about things like relationships, or even relationships with parents?
The relationships with parents, it's an amazing bond to see. I mean, the carers in our community, not only of people with intellectual disability, but all carers are phenomenal, and they contribute to society just amazingly. And I like when you think of the cost, and the cost of to themselves, but also monetarily the cost. My own opinion is they don't get half enough recognition at all. But for people with intellectual disability, that bond with the parents and with their families is very, very close. We have an arm of IDS-TILDA that looks at carers. And one of the things that we did identify is that a lot of the times carers' health and the carers' own needs do suffer. However, because of that love bond and because of the support that they provide to their child, and it's like we're talking about adult children, they wouldn't change their circumstances. Now, a lot of parents and their older parents have said to us that their child, who is now 40, 50 or 60, and they're out in their 80s or older, they find it very, very challenging. They themselves need support and care. So a lot of the care is being left to siblings and sibling care. And that siblings find that very challenging because they're supporting their own parents, maybe their sibling with an intellectual disability, and then maybe they have their own family and their own children. So they've got quite a lot going on in their lives. And there is a big debate in relation to, what will happen in the future. I think we need to sit down and have a more frank conversation. We need to get our government and our departments involved in this conversation. I was at we did a conference on last Friday up in Donegal, and part of the data that we presented was by Professor Damien Brennan. He's one of our researchers here, and he specifically takes care of the carers study of IDS-TILDA. And we did a poll within the room because it was a mix. It was carers, it was family members, it was people with intellectual disability, it was service users and supporters. And we did a poll about what can we do? How can we help parents? How can we help family situations to the future? And a lot of people, I think the vast majority, said we need to look at reinstating residential care, having some kind of support services. And I found that interesting because we don't want to go back. We don't want to go back to the institutional type setting. But there are community support homes that are beautiful. They're very well set up and they really support families. We need to look at our respite care. We don't have enough of respite care. It's almost like, you know, the postcode. In some areas, it's much better than in other areas where there's a scant amount of support or respite. So there's a lot happening. I know Damien now knows this particular area in far greater depth, and he relates to the recent voting we did on the carers referendum, and the fact that we rejected it. And I think that spoke volumes in relation to, you know, what was behind it in relation to the government and what were they trying to get in. And it was, I know myself, you know, we read it and you read those referendums and you read them so often and trying to get it into your head exactly what was the meaning. And a lot of the times it just felt a bit loaded, that the responsibility was being put back on the family, whereas I think it is a society shared responsibility. We need to be looking at our European countries who are able to put things in place, like Sweden and Finland, and have proper, you know, appropriate supports for our older adults, because our older adults, no matter whether they have an intellectual disability or not, they're a valued member of society and they cannot be ignored. They've contributed all their lives and they continue to contribute. And I think that people need to break away from this, what do you call it? The media vision of growing old. There's too many, I always think there's too many ads on the telly telling us to get rid of our wrinkles and get rid of our grey hair. And that's natural aging. And I think in some societies, the older person was looked as the wise person. And I love that you know, that whole concept, that vision of, you know, someone who you really look up to, value, and who can contribute so much, and so much of wisdom. Like, life goes in circles and we've all been through it. And an older person has faced the same problems as a younger person will face, but the younger person doesn't see that. But if we've got this constant message through our media that, oh, you have to get rid of your wrinkles, you have to get rid of your grey hair and all this kind of thing, then we're only reinforcing ageism. And I really think we need to break that barrier. And it doesn't matter. It's like all the isms, like people with disability, there's a stigma and an ism against that, you know, or racism. All these isms need to be got rid of. So challenging it one chip at a time.
I wanted to ask you about what life is like, or what emotions are like for a person with a disability when a parent dies, when their support is taken away.
Yeah, that's an area that isn't hugely investigated.
Right.
Now, there's a Professor Irene Vine who has done a lot of work on future planning and future care and end of life. And I remember one webinar that I listened to. She was talking about working with people with intellectual disability whose parents had died. and the parent was, one particular parent was ill, had cancer, but the family protected the individual and didn't let them know that their parent was dying until the actual event had happened. And that person talked about their feelings like it was like a year or 2 years down the line. They were still grieving.
Yeah.
They never had the opportunity to say goodbye. They never had the opportunity to talk to their parent that was dying. And whilst people thought they were being protective, and it came from, I suppose it came from a good place, but it wasn't a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think people with intellectual disability need to be involved when something like that is happening. Now, I remember doing an interview with a gentleman who had lost his parents very, very suddenly. And he had lived at home all his life. And he had sisters, he had other family members, but the parents did all the care. And when the parents died suddenly, the siblings, his siblings felt such a gulf and a loss, but also because they weren't directly involved in the support, they didn't know what to do either.
Yeah.
And the whole family was suffering and grieving for that loss, plus the loss of what to do, how can we support our brother the best way we can. And that was a struggle for that family because there was a lot happening. But there's a lot of families in that situation throughout Ireland. But as I said in the beginning, I don't think there's enough research done in the area of how do people feel. I'm sure they feel, because people, I always think people with intellectual disability, they have an intellectual disability, so it's a cognitive impairment. They need support in understanding. They need support in navigating systems. They need support in reading maybe, or engaging in access to different things like getting their doctor's appointments or whatever. That's support that they need to, it's like a prosthesis. If you can't walk, if you've got a missing a leg, you get a prosthesis. So it's like a prosthesis they need so that they can navigate their lives. That's a cognitive impairment. It's not an emotional impairment.
Yeah.
They feel the same feelings.
Yeah.
They go through the same feelings, but they may not have communication skills to express it. So I think we need to be very conscious and aware of that.
What about jobs for people with intellectual disabilities? Do you find that they generally work?
I'd love to see it. Unfortunately, we don't.
Yeah.
I'm thinking back on some of the work that we've published, where we saw that less than 6% of people were employed. And of those who were employed, the majority were on less than the minimum wage. Or they were working less than maybe a day or 2 days a week, because they were very conscious of it impacting on their benefits. And it would, because their disability benefit was part of the budget of the family. And if that was impacted, it impacted on the family budget that was available to survive for the week. So they had to be very careful and keep that balance. It's a pity there's not more opportunities. There's a lot of work in Trinity College runs a third level course for people with intellectual disability. I think it's a level 5, but what they try to do is place people in employment. So our younger cohort, our younger people coming up are more educated and are more prepared for employment. There are some wonderful employers who provide those opportunities, support employment coaches and jobs coaches. And there's some wonderful, I know one particular association that I know is Walk, and they're fantastic in supporting job coaching and people with intellectual disability to engage in employment. I work here in Trinity. My research is in the Trinity Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability. And we employ 2 research assistants, and both of them have life experience of intellectual disability. They work, again, they balance their hours. They work 1 or 2 days per week, alternatively, so that they don't interfere with their disability allowance or their other employment. But yes, I think if you provide people with the appropriate supports, provide people with opportunities, people can achieve. And I think that's all employers should think that.
Of course. Now, what about general health? Do you find general health is good in people with intellectual disabilities?
Overall, it has improved since we started our research. We look at multiple morbidities, so that's the presence of 2 or more health conditions, and generally speaking, it has gone down slightly, particularly around mental health. But there's still, there's even saying that though, the prevalence or the percentages are still very high, and particularly in the over 50s and over 65s. When we look at it compared with TILDA, the general population study, we're looking at much higher rates.
Right.
So around 70 to 72% in comparison to 50 to 56% in TILDA. So there is a big difference. A lot, sometimes it can be associated with particular syndromes. For example, for those with maybe Down syndrome, a higher prevalence of dementias is observed. Other particular syndromes can be associated with other kind of conditions. So yeah, it is improving, but we're still seeing very high levels in comparison to the general population.
Okay. And then my last question, you'd be glad to hear. What about the conference? What was it all about?
The conference up in Donegal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a wonderful advanced nurse practitioner. She's an RNID up in Donegal, Carmel Eski, contacted ourselves to develop a kind of a community of practice to have a conference so that she could encourage and spread the research and get the information and the data out to all services and providers up in Donegal. A lot of the times, I think Donegal is kind of way up there in the north, and they feel forgotten.
Yeah.
So it was lovely to actually go up. So we covered everything from physical health, dementia, social determinants of health, the carers, healthcare utilisation. One of my colleagues, Dr. Martin McMahon, talked about his work around cancer. And as I said, Damien, he did a lot of work on the carers stuff. So it was a wonderful conference. We had over 150 people present, both service users, service providers, but I think importantly, policymakers, because that's where you can get the changes. So we had HSE colleagues and Department of Health colleagues present as well, which was wonderful.
Isn't it absolutely great that they go to these things?
It is, and I think we need to encourage people. And like thinking about conferences and stuff, we do a lot of work on dementia. Professor McCarran, that's her particular area. And today they're launching post-diagnostic support guidelines, and they're being launched actually today at this 11:30. Yeah. So there's an event going on for that. We also have here in Trinity, we're doing the Science Night, or the European Science Night. It's almost like a European Science Week. But next week we have a particular event called Child Festival, and it's on the 25th of it's Wednesday, and it's at 3:00. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Carmel Doyle, her area of research is children and intellectual disability. And she is presenting and demonstrating some of her own research, particularly around the challenges parents have with younger children, feeding, medication management, and all the challenges and the complex care of children. So that's on next week. And I have an event on Friday. And again, it's kind of like a community of practice. My own research, I think I talked about it before, is on osteoporosis and bone health. Yeah. And on this Friday, I'm launching a relaunch, it really is of Happy Bones. And Happy Bones is it's I think a program really that was started by colleagues in St. Michael's House many years ago, Lorraine Ledger. And Lorraine is retiring now, and she's handed over the baton to me. So I'm relaunching and invigorating the whole area of bone health and that particular program, Happy Bones. So we're going to kind of reinvent ourselves and get a new vision and mission for this, and a strategy for improving bone health.
Now, we're right at the end of our time. So is there anything else you'd like to say?
Do you know, it was lovely talking to you, John. No, I don't have anything else. If you want me to pop back again, I could talk forever.
It would be our pleasure. Eilish, thank you so much for coming on.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And it was great talking with you.